The Algerian War was fought between 1954 and 1962, primarily between the French and the Algerian FLN. Algeria knows the war as the Algerian War of Independence, while during the war, France had viewed Algeria as not just a colony, but as an annexed territory that was part of France itself. So many French saw it as a civil war. Anyway, when prospects of a peace process began between the French and the Algerians, a third belligerent spawned into the conflict, which was the OAS. The OAS was a terrorist movement founded in 1961 that was particularly active in the final phase of the Algerian War until 1962 and wanted to prevent Algeria's independence from French colonial rule by all means necessary. The OAS would carry out bombings, assassinations, and acts of torture that resulted in over 2,000 deaths during the war. Since the OAS was not only attacking the FLN but also the French at various points in time, the French government had to respond. In the summer of 1961, when Algiers was under regular terrorist attack from the OAS, 3 supporters of General Charles de Gaulle met in Paris to discuss their plans for a response. It was agreed that the propaganda posters of the MPC were no longer sufficient and that a more drastic action was needed to be taken by the French government, and therefore they formed the Barbouzes as a clandestine counterinsurgency organization outside of French legal parameters to defeat the OAS. Hundreds of members were recruited to the organization, and they were existing MPC supporters, former soldiers, laborers, and more. In 1961, the French recruits started to arrive in Algeria. The French military supplied them with weapons and gave them permission to break curfew, and requested to blow up OAS activist cafes in Algiers. Soon, news of the Barbouzes had begun to reach the press. The press reported that the head of the Barbouzes in Algiers was Colonel Jean Leroy, who was a veteran paratrooper officer and guerrilla leader who was half French and half Vietnamese. In fall of 1961, Leroy accepted a commission from de Gaulle's government in Paris to form a 100-man underground police force to fight against the OAS and its own terrorist tactics. Barbouzes membership and political activities, however, were strictly secret, since the French government could not admit knowledge of and involvement in illegal terrorist groups. Since many OAS leaders had emerged from the French military and therefore had connections with the military and French Secret Service, the French army and police in Algeria were largely ill-equipped to tackle the attacks of the Barbouzes and didn't really know too much of their activities other than the fact that they were fighting against the OAS. You see, the French government viewed covert operations as necessary and drastic means for de Gaulle. Therefore, the Barbouzes were tasked with infiltrating the OAS, disrupting its operations, and sometimes even assassinating its leaders. Prevented from even the ability to arrest OAS members or even hand them over to authorities, the Barbouzes agents were ordered to kill and only kill OAS members. As a result of Barbouzes attacks on OAS safe houses, the OAS orchestrated various attacks on their own hideouts, including on New Year's Eve of 1961. And by the end of the year, fighting between the Barbouzes and the OAS had escalated. French Prime Minister Michel Debré voiced disapproval of Barbouzes tactics, claiming that Algeria had already seen enough bloodshed. You see, shortly before midnight on New Year's Eve 1961, an OAS detachment opened fire on the Barbouzes hideout at the Ville Bel Air with bazookas and machine guns. Leroy's men replied with automatic arms and hand grenades. Fleeing, one dead OAS terrorist was left dead under a bush. He was the first open casualty of the OAS, and during this incident, Colonel Leroy kept his own casualty secret and moved out the next night to another secret headquarters. This is essentially how the covert OAS and Barbouzes war went. In the city of Algiers, the OAS essentially owned it in January of 1962. The police would either not or could not find the OAS terrorists. The French army was either sympathetic or indifferent towards the OAS and their resolve to keep Algeria in French hands. But throughout January, the OAS had been under attack by the Barbouzes. They began by machine gunning cars in which OAS men blatantly drove around Algiers. Next, the Barbouzes bombed 17 cafes that patronized exclusively to the OAS. Barbouzes were also credited with the disappearance of several OAS leaders in the city. Although the Barbouzes would succeed in killing over 100 OAS members, the French public saw them as nothing more than a government-hired hit squad. Additionally, the Barbouzes would mostly be wiped out during their covert war with the OAS by the end of 1962. And that is the Barbouzes and their part in the Algerian War. What other aspects of the Algerian War would you like for me to cover? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.